The package was addressed to a girl who'd been dead for 6 years. I checked the label 3 times. Her name. Her house number. Current postage. Mailed from inside the village. I need to go back to the beginning. My name is Nate Cowell, and I took the mail carrier position in Hargrove, Washington, in March of last year. Population somewhere around 400, give or take. Nestled into a valley between 2 ridgelines thick with Douglas fir, about 90 minutes from the nearest town with a traffic light. Beautiful place. The kind of place where people still wave from their porches and the general store owner knows which brand of coffee you buy before you walk through the door. I'd been working rural routes for the Postal Service for almost 11 years by that point. Started in eastern Oregon, then did a stint in northern Montana. Small communities weren't new to me. But the Hargrove position opened suddenly. The previous carrier, a man named Dennis Brower, had taken early retirement with no notice, and the regional office in Olympia was eager to fill it fast. They offered a relocation incentive and a modest bump in per diem for the remoteness. I took it. The first person I met was Peg Stahl, who ran the Hargrove post office. And I use the term loosely. The post office was a converted garage attached to her house at the bottom of Main Street, outfitted with a sorting counter, a wall of P.O. boxes, and a little service window with a brass bell. Peg was in her mid-60s, broad-shouldered, efficient. She'd held the postmaster role for over 20 years. She showed me the sorting system, the route map, the vehicle, a white Jeep Cherokee with a faded USPS magnet on the door, and gave me a laminated card with the delivery sequence. 47 stops. Some were clusters of mailboxes at the road. Some were individual houses up long gravel drives. A couple were businesses, the general store, the auto shop, the church. It was on my second day that Peg told me about the skips. She said it casually. We were sorting the morning batch, and she pulled 3 envelopes from the pile and set them aside on the counter without a word. I watched her do it, then asked what those were. Skips, she said. Those go in the bin under the counter. I looked at the addresses. They were all for houses on my route. Legitimate addresses. One was a power bill. We don't deliver to those. I asked. Not to those houses. Not right now. She didn't elaborate. She moved on to explaining the outgoing pickup schedule and I let it go, figuring it was some kind of temporary hold, maybe the residents were traveling, or there was a dispute, or the houses were vacant. All of those happen on rural routes. You learn not to overthink it. Over the next 2 weeks, I settled into the job. The route took about 5 hours door to door if I didn't stop to talk, which I usually did. People were friendly. Curious about the new carrier. A man named Hal Lundquist at stop 14 always had his golden retriever sitting by the mailbox like a sentry. The woman at stop 22, Margaret something, left a thermos of coffee on her porch rail for me every other morning with a sticky note that said, "For the mail guy." It was always still hot. I liked Hargrove. I liked the work. The valley was quiet and the air tasted like pine resin and wood smoke, and there was something steady about the rhythm of the route. You learn a community from the outside in when you're a carrier. You learn it by what people send and receive, by the state of their driveways, by whether the lights are on at noon or off by 7. I also learned which houses were skips. There were 5 of them. Peg pulled their mail every morning without comment and dropped it in the bin. The bin, I noticed, was emptied at the end of each week, not returned to sender, not forwarded, just gone. When I asked where the mail went, Peg said, "It gets handled." She said this with the same flat tone she used for everything, but there was a border around the words. A fence I could feel. I drove past those 5 houses on my route every day. They were not abandoned. That was the thing. They were occupied. Stop 9 was a blue split level with a vegetable garden and a truck in the driveway. I could see someone moving behind the kitchen curtain most mornings. Stop 19 was a small brown cottage with firewood stacked neatly along the side wall and a bird feeder freshly filled. Stop 26 had a child's bicycle leaning against the porch steps. People lived in those houses. They just didn't get mail. And nobody on the route mentioned them. Not once. In 3 weeks of daily small talk, weather, sports, gossip about the new broadband tower proposal, not a single person referenced any of the 5 skip houses or the people inside them. It wasn't avoidance exactly. It was more like those houses occupied a different layer of the village. Like they'd been gently cut out of the social map and everyone had agreed not to notice the holes. I want to be precise about this, because it matters. It wasn't fear. Or if it was, it wasn't the kind of fear I recognized. Nobody glanced at those houses with dread. Nobody lowered their voice. They simply didn't include them. The way you might not include a piece of furniture that's always been in the room. It was there. You navigated around it. You never discussed it. By week 4, I started asking questions. Carefully. I asked Hal Lundquist, the man with the golden retriever, who lived in the blue split level at Stop 9. He was mid-sentence about something else, and he just stopped. Not startled. Not angry. He looked at me the way you'd look at someone who'd just said something in a language you didn't speak. Blank. Patient. Then he picked up where he'd left off as if I hadn't said anything at all. I asked the woman at the general store, Rita Engel, whether the family at Stop 26, the one with the bicycle, had kids in the village school. She smiled at me and said, "What can I get you, Nate?" And that was it. I tried 4 different people over the course of a week. Same result every time. Not hostility. Not deflection. Something more thorough than that. The question simply didn't land. It was like throwing a ball at a wall that absorbed it silently. I called the regional office in Olympia. I talked to my supervisor, a man named Frank Delaney, and asked whether there were any formal mail holds or delivery exemptions on file for those 5 addresses. He checked the system and said no. All 5 were active residential addresses with no flags, no holds, no forwards. According to USPS records, they were receiving regular delivery. So I should be delivering to them, I said. There was a pause on the line. Then Frank said, "Just follow Peg's guidance on local procedures. She's been there a long time. Frank, these are occupied houses. I'm withholding their mail. Someone's not getting their bills, their medication refills, their..." Nate. Follow Peg's guidance. He hung up. Not rudely. Just completely. That night I sat in my rental, a small cabin on the east side of the valley, about a quarter mile from the nearest neighbor, and looked at my route map. I'd circled the 5 skip houses in red pen. They were scattered across the route with no obvious geographic pattern. Different streets. Different elevations. The only thing they had in common was that they were all single-family homes, all occupied, and all cut off. I opened my laptop and searched the addresses. Property records were sparse, Hargroves County filings were barely digitized, but I found enough. The blue split level at Stop 9 was owned by a man named Carl Jessup. The brown cottage at 19 was listed under the name Alma Voss. Stop 26, with the bicycle, belonged to a couple named David and Sarah Klein. Normal names. Normal people, as far as I could tell. Tax-paying homeowners in a small village in Washington state who simply did not receive their mail and whose neighbors had collectively decided they did not exist. I want to describe what happened next precisely, because it was the first moment that moved this from strange to something else. It was a Tuesday. April 22nd. I was on the route, approaching Stop 19, Alma Voss's cottage. I had no mail for her, of course. Peg had pulled it that morning. But I slowed down as I passed, the way I always did, and this time the front door was open. Alma Voss was standing in the doorway. She was maybe 70. Small. White hair pinned back. She wore a gray cardigan and she was looking directly at me. Not waving. Not calling out. Just standing there, watching the Jeep pass, with an expression I can only describe as practiced stillness. Like she'd stood in that doorway 1,000 times watching the mail carrier drive by without stopping. I pulled over. I don't know what made me do it. There was no mail to deliver. I had no official reason. But I put the Jeep in park and got out and walked up her front path, which was lined with small white stones, and I said, "Good morning. I'm Nate, the new mail carrier." She looked at me for a long time. Her eyes were pale blue, very clear. "I know who you are," she said. "You pass every day." "Yes, ma'am." "I'm sorry I haven't." "You don't need to apologize. You're doing what they told you." That word, they, had no venom in it. No bitterness. She said it the way you'd refer to the weather. An impersonal force that simply was. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You can ask. Why don't you get mail?" She studied me. Then she stepped back from the doorway and said, "Do you want to come inside?" I didn't go in. I want to be clear about that, because later it mattered that I hadn't crossed that threshold. Something held me on the path. Not fear, but something adjacent. An instinct I couldn't name. Instead I said, "Maybe another time. But I'd like to understand what's going on." Alma Voss leaned against the doorframe and folded her arms. "How long have you been here, Nate?" "About a month." "And you've already noticed?" "That's faster than Dennis." "Dennis Brower?" "The previous carrier." Dennis took almost 2 years before he started asking questions. And by then he'd already been here too long to hear the answers. I asked her what she meant. She looked past me, up the road, toward the ridge. "Have you met everyone in the village yet?" "Most people, I think." "And have you noticed anything about them?" I hadn't. Or I thought I hadn't. But as she asked the question, something shifted in my memory. Not a single observation but an accumulation of small ones I hadn't consciously assembled. The way conversations in Hargrove tended to circle the same topics. The way people's anecdotes about the village rarely went back more than a few years. The way nobody ever seemed to disagree about anything, not in a forced way, but in the way of people who were all drawing from the same well. "They get along well," I said, hearing how thin it sounded. Alma almost smiled. "They do." "What are you telling me?" "I'm telling you that there are 47 stops on your route, and 5 of them are skips, and you should think carefully about what those 2 groups have in common and what they don't." A truck came down the road behind me. I turned and saw it was Hal Lundquist's silver Ford. He drove past at normal speed, eyes forward, and did not look at me or at Alma or at the cottage. The golden retriever was in the passenger seat, also facing forward. When I turned back, Alma had gone inside and closed the door. I stood on her path for a long time. That evening I did something I'd never done before on a route. I went through the bin under Peg's counter after she'd gone to bed. The post office was unlocked. Peg never locked it, which I'd found charming until that moment, when it became convenient instead. The bin was empty. She'd cleared it that afternoon, a day early. I checked the trash, the recycling, the back storage room. Nothing. But I found something else. In the storage room, on a shelf behind a box of priority mailers, there was a binder. Black, 3-ring, unlabeled. I opened it. Inside were pages, dozens of them, each one a single sheet with a name, an address, and a date. Some of the dates went back 15 years. Some were recent. Each page also had a short notation at the bottom in Peg's handwriting. The notations were single words or short phrases. Spoke out of turn. Remembered differently. Asked about the Pruitt family. Would not participate. Noticed the count. I photographed every page with my phone. There were 41 sheets in total. I recognized the 5 current skip addresses among them. But there were 36 others. 36 names and addresses of people who had, at some point over the past 15 years, been designated as skips. Some of those names I recognized from the village. People I'd met. People who waved from their porches and left me coffee. They'd been skips once. And then they weren't anymore. I put the binder back exactly as I'd found it. I drove to my cabin. I sat at my kitchen table and scrolled through the photos on my phone, and I tried to understand what I was looking at. The notations. The reasons. They were all the same kind of thing. Each person on the list had done something that set them apart from the group. Asked a question they shouldn't have. Remembered something the village had decided to forget. Refused to go along with something. Noticed a discrepancy. And then they'd been cut off. Skipped. Their mail withheld, their social existence quietly revoked. But here's what kept me at that table until 2 in the morning. 36 of the 41 had been reinstated. Their skip status had ended. They were back on the route. Back in the village. Back in the conversation. What had they done to come back? I thought about the people I'd met. Hal with his dog. Rita at the store. Margaret with the coffee thermos. Friendly, agreeable, circling the same safe topics, never disagreeing, never reaching back too far, never asking the wrong question. Had they all been through it? Had they all spent weeks or months or years standing in their doorways watching the mail carrier drive past, waiting for the village to let them back in? And when they came back, what had they given up to get there? I couldn't sleep. At around 3 in the morning I got in my car and drove the route in the dark. I don't know what I was looking for. The village was quiet. Porch lights on at some houses, dark at others. Normal. But I slowed at each of the 5 skip houses and looked at them in a way I hadn't before. The blue split level. Carl Jessup. Lights off. But the truck was in the driveway and I could see the faintest blue glow of a television through the upstairs window. A man awake at 3 a.m., alone, watching nothing, waiting. The brown cottage. Alma Voss. Dark. Completely still. Stop 26. The Kleins. The bicycle was gone from the porch. I stopped the car. I'd seen that bicycle every day for a month. A red Schwinn with white handlebar grips, leaning against the railing at the same angle. And now it was gone. At 3 in the morning. The porch was bare. I almost got out. Almost walked up to the door. But the house had a quality of silence that was different from sleep. It was the silence of a held breath. Of a house that knew it was being watched and was waiting for you to move on. I drove back to my cabin. The next morning, the bicycle was back. Same angle. Same position. But the white handlebar grips were different. They were newer. Brighter. As if the bike was the same but the grips had been replaced overnight. Or as if it was a different bicycle entirely, made to look the same. I delivered the route that day in a state of heightened attention I couldn't shut off. Everything looked the same as always, but I was reading the village differently now. I noticed that Hal Lundquist said almost exactly the same thing to me he'd said the previous Tuesday. Not the same topic, the same words. How about this wind, huh? Keeps the bugs down at least. I checked my memory. He'd said that last Tuesday. Verbatim. At stop 14, Margaret's coffee thermos was on the porch rail. I picked it up and looked at the sticky note. For the mail guy. Same handwriting. Same placement. Same wording as every other time. But the coffee was cold. It had been sitting there for hours. Maybe since the previous night. As if it had been set out on schedule by someone following a pattern rather than a genuine impulse. I finished the route. I went back to the post office and found Peg sorting outgoing mail. I stood across the counter from her and said, "Peg, I need to understand the skip system." She didn't look up. There's nothing to understand. Some houses don't get delivery for a while. It's a local arrangement. Who decides? It's not a decision. It's more like a consensus. A consensus about what? She set down the stack of letters and looked at me. Her face was patient but her eyes were doing something I hadn't seen before. They were measuring me. Calibrating. About who's ready, she said. Ready for what? Ready to be part of things again. And the ones who aren't ready. What happens to them? Nothing happens to them, Nate. They're just not included. For a while. Until they are. Alma Voss has been a skip for how long? Something changed in her face. Very slight. A tightening around the mouth. You talked to Alma. I didn't confirm or deny. Peg looked at me for a long time, and I felt that measuring quality intensify. She was seeing where I fell. Which side of a line? Nate, she said. I like you. You're good at this job. Dennis was good too, for a while. I'm going to give you the same advice I gave him. Don't visit the skip houses. Don't talk to the skip people. Deliver your route, enjoy the community, and let the process work. What process? The one that keeps Hargrove the way it is. She went back to sorting. The conversation was over. But I couldn't leave it alone. I know that's the part of this that sounds stupid, the part where the reasonable thing is to accept the paycheck and the pine-scented air and the friendly waves and not look under the surface. I've thought about why I couldn't. I think it's because of the bicycle. The handlebar grips. That tiny wrongness that told me the surface of Hargrove was being maintained, curated, like a stage set, and the people maintaining it had been doing it so long they'd started to lose the texture of the original. The copies were getting slightly worse each time. The coffee a little colder. The phrases a little too repeated. The friendliness a little too uniform. Something in Hargrove was keeping the village in a loop, and the skip houses were the ones that had fallen out of it, and I needed to know what the loop was. On April 28th I went back to Alma Vasa's cottage. This time I knocked. She opened the door immediately, as if she'd been standing behind it. "You came back," she said. Not surprised. Almost resigned. "I need you to tell me what happened to you. Why you're a skip." She let me in this time. The cottage was sparse and clean. A wood stove in the corner, a kitchen with a small table, a shelf of books that looked well read. She made tea without asking if I wanted any, and set a mug in front of me, and sat down across the table. "I've lived in Hargrove for 38 years, she said. "My husband Edgar and I moved here in the 80s. It was a good place then. Normal, if such a thing exists. People came and went. There were disagreements and reconciliations and all the ordinary friction of a small community." She paused. Touched the handle of her mug. The change was gradual. "I can't give you a year." It was like a tide. Sometime in the mid-90s, things started to smooth out. Conflicts stopped happening. Not because they were resolved, because they stopped arising. People began to agree. About everything. Small things first. The color of the new church roof. The hours at the general store. Then bigger things. How to raise children. What to remember. What to forget. What to forget. There was a family here. The Pruitts. They'd been in the valley for 3 generations. In 1997, their youngest son drowned in the creek east of town. It was an accident. Terrible, ordinary accident. But the village decided it hadn't happened. I set down my tea. Not that they denied it publicly. There was no announcement. No conspiracy. But within weeks, no one mentioned the boy. Or the Pruitts. When I brought it up at the store, people looked at me the way you've seen them look. That blankness. That patience. And then they moved on. The Pruitts moved away. The Pruitts are still here, Nate. Stop 31. Tom and June Pruitt. You deliver to them every day. I knew Stop 31. A green ranch house with a wind chime on the porch. Tom Pruitt had shaken my hand the first week and told me he'd lived in Hargrove all his life. He'd mentioned his grown children, a daughter in Seattle, a son in Boise. He hadn't mentioned a youngest son. He hadn't mentioned a drowning. They forgot, I said. They were brought back in, Alma said. That's what the process does. The village pushes you out, cuts you off, isolates you, withholds your mail, stops seeing you, and in that silence, you have a choice. You can hold on to what you know, what you saw, what you remember. Or you can let it go. And when you've let enough of it go, they bring you back. And it works. People actually forget. She looked at me with those pale blue eyes. You've met them. Do they seem like people who remember? I thought about how. The same sentence, the same inflection, every Tuesday. Margaret's thermos, cold now, placed by rote. The loops. What happens to the ones who don't let go? I asked. Alma stood up and went to her kitchen window. Beyond it, I could see the edge of the valley, the dark line of fir trees against a white sky. Carl Jessup at Stop 9 has been a skip for 4 years. He won't let go of something that happened to his sister. The Kleins at 26 have been out for 2 years. I've been out for 7. Since I started talking about the Pruitt boy. 7 years without mail. 7 years without anything, Nate. No one speaks to me. No one looks at me. The store won't sell to me. I drive 45 minutes to Millhaven for groceries. I file my taxes online because my paperwork never arrives. I exist in this house and in the spaces between the houses and in no other way. Her voice didn't waver. It was the steadiest thing I'd ever heard. Why don't you leave? Because I was right. The boy drowned. His name was Michael Pruitt and he was 8 years old and he drowned on June 14, 1997, and I will not let this village make that untrue. If I leave, there's no one here who remembers him at all. I sat with that for a while. The tea cooled in my hands. Alma, I said. What's doing this? Is it a person? A group? She came back to the table and sat down. I used to think it was Peg. Or the council. Or some inner circle making decisions. But it's not. I've watched it for 7 years and I'll tell you what I think, and you won't like it. Tell me. It's the village itself. Not the buildings. Not the land. The social body. The collective. It behaves like an organism. It maintains itself. When a part becomes irritant, when a person remembers too much or asks the wrong thing or disrupts the agreement, the organism isolates them. Pushes them out. Applies pressure. And most people aren't built to survive that. Most people, when every face they know goes blank, when their mail stops coming and their phone stops ringing and their neighbors look through them like glass, most people will give up anything to make it stop. They'll forget their own children's names to be let back in. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. That she'd been alone too long and the isolation had warped her perspective. But I'd been in the village for 5 weeks and I'd watched a man look straight through me for asking a simple question, and I'd seen a bicycle vanish and reappear slightly wrong, and I'd held a thermos of coffee that had been placed with the precision of a ritual and the warmth of nothing. What happened to Dennis? I asked. The carrier before me. Dennis figured it out in his 2nd year. Slower than you, but he got there. He started delivering to the skip houses. Brought me my mail for the first time in 5 years. Brought Carl his. Even left packages on the Klein's porch. And the village pushed back. Not violently. Never violently. That's not how it works. His route started taking longer, roads he'd driven 100 times seemed to add distance, the turns came at slightly different places. People stopped coming to their mailboxes when he arrived. His conversation dried up. Then his cabin started having problems. Pipes. Electrical. Nothing dramatic. Just a steady erosion of comfort. And he started to feel it, that blankness directed at him. The whole village looking through him. He quit. He quit. Drove away on a Wednesday morning and didn't come back. I watched him go from this window. She paused. But here's what I need you to understand, Nate. Dennis was a skip for 6 months before he left. After he started delivering to us, the village put him on the list. And in those 6 months, I watched him change. He came to my door one day, maybe 4 months in, and he couldn't remember why he'd started delivering to me. He had my mail in his hand and he was looking at it like he'd never seen my name before. The village was already working on him. If he'd stayed another month, he wouldn't have left. He'd have forgotten there was anywhere else to go. I felt cold. Not the temperature. A cold inside the walls of my thinking. You're telling me it can make people forget even when they're resisting. I'm telling you the pressure is constant, and it's coming from everywhere, and most people can't resist something they can't locate. You can fight a person. You can't fight the absence of every person. I left her cottage at around 4 in the afternoon. The light was getting soft. I drove back toward my cabin, and on the way I passed stop 31. The Green Ranch House. Tom Pruitt's place. The wind chime was turning slowly on the porch. I pulled over. I sat in my car and I looked at that house and I thought about an 8-year-old boy named Michael drowning in a creek 29 years ago, and his parents still living in the same house, with the same wind chime, having traded their grief for readmission into the warm agreement of the village, and I felt something crack open in my chest that was not fear but something worse. It was the understanding that they'd made a choice. And that the choice had been rational. And that I could not promise myself I wouldn't make the same one. I went home. I sat at my table. I opened my laptop and drafted an email to Frank Delaney at the regional office. I laid out everything, the skip system, the binder, the withheld mail, the 5 occupied houses being denied service. I wrote it clearly and factually and I attached the photographs of every page in the binder. I hit send at 11:47 p.m. At 11:48 p.m., the email bounced. Server error. I tried again. Bounced. I tried my personal email. Bounced. I tried to call Frank's office line. No signal. My phone showed full bars, but the call wouldn't connect. I tried 911, the same. Full bars, no connection. The phone was there. The network was there. But there was nothing on the other end. I set the phone down on the table and looked at it. Full bars. No voice. The shape of connection with nothing inside it. I didn't panic. I want to be honest about that. I felt very calm. The kind of calm that comes when you realize the walls of the room you're standing in are not where you thought they were, when you understand that the room is larger or smaller than you assumed, and you have to recalibrate everything without moving. I got in my car and drove toward the highway. Hargrove sits in the valley with one road in and one road out, a 2-lane blacktop that winds up through the trees to the state route. I'd driven it dozens of times. 32 minutes to the junction. I drove for an hour. The road kept going. The trees kept passing. The headlights lit the same curves, the same guardrails, the same mile markers. But the junction never came. The road just went on, bending and climbing and bending again, and after 90 minutes I passed a sign I recognized, the one at the village entrance, and I was back in Hargrove. I pulled over. I sat there with the engine running, in the dark, on the road I'd just driven in the wrong direction for 90 minutes, and I listened to the engine and the wind and the forest and the nothing. I drove back to my cabin. I went to bed. I lay in the dark and listened to the silence of the valley, and I understood, with a clarity that felt physical, that Hargrove was not going to let me make a phone call or send an email or drive away until it was done with me. The next morning I went to the post office. Peg was sorting the mail. She looked up when I came in and her face was kind. "Morning, Nate," she said. How'd you sleep? Peg, I said. I want to deliver to all 47 stops today. She stopped sorting. She set the mail down. She looked at me the way she'd looked at me before, measuring, calibrating, but this time there was something else in it. Something that might have been sorrow. I wish you wouldn't, she said. I know. It won't change anything. It'll just start the clock. I understand. She stood there for a long time. Then she reached under the counter and brought up the skip mail, 5 households worth, sorted and bundled, and set it on the counter in front of me. When it starts, she said, you'll know. It won't be anything dramatic. You'll just start feeling lighter. Like something you were carrying has been set down. It'll feel like relief. That's how it begins. She went back to sorting. I took all the mail, all 47 stops worth, and loaded the Jeep. I delivered to every house on the route. All of them. When I pulled up to the blue split level at stop 9, Carl Jessup was standing on his porch. He was a big man, bearded, maybe 50. He watched me get out of the Jeep with an expression I'd seen before, on Alma's face. Practiced stillness. I handed him a stack of mail 4 inches thick. Power bills, credit card offers, a magazine, a letter with no return address. He took it. He looked at me. Thank you, he said, and his voice broke on the second word, and he turned and went inside, and I heard the door lock behind him. At stop 19, Alma was in her garden. I gave her the mail and she held it against her chest with both hands and didn't speak. At stop 26, the Klein's house, no one answered the door. I left the mail in the box. The bicycle was there. The handlebar grips were white. But as I turned to leave, I heard something from inside. A child's voice, singing. The melody was simple and wandering, the way children sing when they're alone and not performing for anyone. Just making sound for the joy of it. I finished the route. I went home. And then it started. It was subtle, like Peg said. The next morning, I woke up and couldn't remember Alma's last name. I knew her first name. I knew the cottage. But the surname was gone, just a smooth place in my memory where it should have been. I grabbed my phone and checked the photos of the binder. Voss. Alma Voss. I said it out loud 3 times and wrote it on my hand. By noon it was gone again. The ink was there on my skin, but the name looked unfamiliar, like a word in a foreign language. I started writing things down. Everything. I bought a notebook from the general store. Rita sold it to me without comment, though her eyes lingered on my face a beat too long, and I filled it. Names, addresses, dates, observations. The Pruitt boy. Michael. June 14, 1997. Alma's 7 years. Carl's sister. The binder. The skip system. Everything Alma had told me, everything I'd seen, every small wrongness I'd noticed. I wrote it all down because I could feel it beginning to slide. Not dramatically. Not like forgetting where you put your keys. More like the memory was losing its emotional weight. The outrage I'd felt sitting at Alma's kitchen table was becoming academic, abstract, like reading about an injustice in another country. Still true. But no longer mine. That scared me more than the road looping. Over the next 5 days, the village worked on me. I don't know how else to describe it. The people on my route were the same, friendly, warm, present, but there was a new quality to their attention. They looked at me longer. They asked how I was feeling. They told me I seemed tired, that I should rest, that Hargrove was a good place to slow down and let things be simple. Their concern was genuine. That was the worst part. It wasn't a performance. They really wanted me to be comfortable. They wanted me to stop struggling. I kept delivering to all 47 houses. Every day. Every Skip household got their mail. And every day I woke up a little lighter, a little less certain why I was doing it. On May 4th I drove past the Klein's house and couldn't remember why I'd ever thought the bicycle was important. It was just a bicycle. Red. Normal. I had to pull over and open my notebook to reconstruct the significance. The grips had changed, indicating the surface was being maintained, indicating the village was curating its own appearance. But even reading my own words, I felt like I was reading someone else's conspiracy theory. Paranoid. Overblown. Grips on a bicycle. Who cares? I sat in the Jeep and gripped the steering wheel and said out loud, "My name is Nate Cowell. I am a mail carrier." There are 5 houses that don't get mail because the village cuts people off for remembering things it wants to forget. A boy named Michael Pruitt drowned in 1997. This is real. The words sounded strange in my mouth. Not false. Just distant. Like reciting something memorized for a test. On May 6th, Peg pulled me aside after sorting. "You look better," she said. "More settled." "I feel the same." "No, you don't. You feel easier. Don't you?" I did. I felt easier. The knot of urgency that had lived in my gut for 2 weeks was loosening. The village was beautiful that morning, the fir trees backlit by early sun, the sound of the creek running through the center of town, the smell of Hal's wood smoke drifting down the road. It was a good place. It was a place that took care of its own. I caught myself thinking that and opened my notebook and read it, cover to cover, sitting on the post office floor. It took 40 minutes. Halfway through, I started crying, and I didn't fully understand why. On May 8th, I went to see Alma. She opened the door and looked at me, and I saw something in her face that I recognized from the inside. She was checking whether I was still there. Whether the person she'd talked to was still behind my eyes. "You're fading," she said. Not accusing. Gentle. "I know. What do you remember?" "Everything." I wrote it down. "But it feels like it happened to someone else." "Yes." She nodded. She'd seen this before. Dennis. Others probably. People who'd gotten close to the truth and then felt it dissolve in their hands like wet paper. "You have a choice," she said. "The same one everyone gets. You can let it go. Stop delivering to us. Let the village take back what it wants. In a few weeks you'll feel fine. You'll be one of them. Happy. Agreeable. You'll wave from your porch and leave coffee for the next carrier, and you won't remember this conversation. Or you hold on. And the village will push you out the way it pushed me out. And you'll spend the rest of your time here alone, in a valley you can't leave, remembering things no one else does. Those are the only options. There's a third one, but you won't like it. Tell me. You keep delivering. To everyone. Every day. You fight the forgetting every morning. You read your notebook and you say the names, and you carry the mail to every door, and you refuse to let the village sort people into real and not real. And maybe, if you do it long enough, the organism gets confused. It can't push you out because you're still performing your function. It can't bring you in because you won't stop delivering to the people it's rejected. You become something it doesn't have a category for. Did Dennis try that? Dennis lasted 6 months and then forgot why he was trying. How do I not forget? She went to her bookshelf and took down a small leather-bound journal. She opened it to the first page. Written in careful, tiny handwriting was a single line. Michael Pruitt, age 8, drowned in the East Creek, June 14, 1997. This happened. I was there. She turned the page. The same line. The next page. The same line. Every page, hundreds of them, the same sentence, written by hand, every single day for 7 years. You write it down, she said. Every morning. Before you do anything else. The thing you refuse to forget. You write it until your hand knows it better than your mind does. And when the village takes the meaning, your hand gives it back. I took the notebook she offered me, a blank one, identical to hers, and I drove home. That was 11 months ago. I'm still here. I'm still carrying the route. All 47 stops, every day. Peg still pulls the skip mail every morning, and every morning I take it from the bin and deliver it anyway. She's stopped objecting. She looks at me now with an expression I can't quite read, not anger, not sorrow, something more like confusion. I'm a variable she doesn't know how to process. The village is still working on me. I feel it every day. That gentle pull toward ease, toward agreement, toward letting go. Some mornings I wake up and I can't remember why the skip houses matter, and I have to sit on the edge of my bed and open my notebook and read the words I wrote the morning before. Michael Pruitt, age 8, drowned in the East Creek, June 14, 1997. Carl Jessup's sister was hurt and no one helped. The Klein family is real. Alma Voss has been alone for 7 years. I deliver to all 47 stops. I write it again. Every morning. Before coffee, before sorting, before anything. And then I go to work. The village is beautiful today. The wind is coming down through the valley and the fir trees are moving in long, slow waves, and Hal's dog is at the mailbox, and somewhere a child is singing. I know what I know. I wrote it down. But I'd be lying if I told you the handwriting still looks like mine.